Vineyards are signs of hope. Cultivation takes time, patience, love, hard work, and stability. One can't expect immediate benefits. There must be peace and imagination, vision enough to dream and see new possibilities. So when Jesus speaks of a vineyard, those hearing him recall the song of the vineyard, voiced by the prophet Isaiah. Let me sing to my beloved the song of his love for his vineyard. My beloved had a vineyard on a very fertile hill. He dug the soil, cleared it of stones, and planted choice vines in it. In the middle, he built a watchtower and hewed out a winepress. The plot thickens. If one parable doesn't work, try again. Another parable, another challenge, another urgent plea to reverse directions, to change heart and mind so that we may share life together in the fullness of God's kingdom. The gospel for this day is a continuation of what we heard before, where the legitimate religious and political leaders in Jerusalem persist in their challenge of Jesus. Who do you think you are? And why should we listen to you? They don't get it. So Jesus begins once again. A landowner plants a vineyard, fences it, digs a winepress in it, builds a watchtower, and then entrusts it to tenants. Then he departs to go live life in another place. Tradition tells us Jesus' story is an ordinary one, well known in Israel. Everyone hearing it would recognize that God's vineyard is Israel, that the tenant farmers are the ones left to provide oversight of the land, that at harvest time, payment is to be rendered by the tenant farmers. They are expected to return a share of the harvest to the vineyard owner. So far, so good. But then the story takes an unusual twist. 3 times, servants are dispatched with the mission to return with fruit from the harvest. Each time the servants are sent, they are mistreated and abused. Each time they receive harsher and more injurious treatment. The first servants are beaten. A second group of servants, when they are sent, they also are shamefully beaten, brutalized, and even stoned. A third time, even more servants are sent who receive like treatment. Their fate is the same. The owner of the vineyard, on hearing what happened, now reasons. But I have to ask, is this really reasonable? Perhaps these ornery tenants will act differently if I send my son. They will respect him. So the son willingly goes to do the father's bidding. And now I asked you, honestly, would you go? If it were you, if you were the son, don't you think it might occur to you that what was done to those who came before you might be done to you? Would you go? The tenants, the caregivers, says Jesus, do exactly what we are led to imagine. Why expect anything different? Hence the narrative continues. Upon seeing the heir, the son, they forget who they are in their relationship with the vineyard owner. So they hatch a plot. Here is the heir. If we do away with him, then the inheritance is up for grabs, and we can immediately claim it. So they seize him, casting him off the land, and they kill him. In the cutthroat world of Roman-occupied Palestine, many would see in this business as usual. Honor and compassion and justice, the slaughter of the innocent were thought of as collateral damage, unintended casualties when profit and gain were at stake. The violence of avarice and coveting come at great cost. What was done to the prophets will be done to Jesus. My. What a twisted tangle we weave. Things are falling apart. Years before our gospel writer Matthew puts quill pen to papyrus so that the story of Jesus was committed to writing, the community that is the Jewish Christian community had lived through some difficult days. They had seen the Second Temple in Jerusalem ransacked and destroyed. They had felt the violence of the Roman army, looting, killing, plundering, disappearing some folks, and taking others into slavery as hostages. They felt besieged, like they had no center. In our world, we hear of such violence in one form or another every day. Reports come from as near as down the road and as far as continents a world over. Sometimes a week can feel like eternity, as images numb our minds and rend our hearts, reminding us again and again how vulnerable, how random, how senseless things can be. When things fall apart, how do we go on into the future? There are times when business as usual makes sense, and there are times when business as usual makes no sense. Tensions build and frustrations mount. Some feel despair because things won't ever be the way they used to be. Some say that what's happened has happened, and some simply need time. A bit of time for lament and healing. A bit of time because without lament, there is no healing. At the center of all this, conflict evolves as those who believe Jesus to be the Messiah take one side, and those who believe messianic claims about Jesus to be sheer nonsense take another. Once the temple fell, the messianic community centered in Jesus was scapegoated. They were blamed for what the Roman army did, and they suffered shunning, excommunication, and expulsion from community gatherings. When Matthew shares his account of the gospel, the people hearing Matthew's gospel were aware of these tensions and what had happened. This is why contemporary New Testament scholars believe that Matthew tells this parable this way. Parables, remember, reveal what God and God's kingdom are like. Parables about God's kingdom are where the unexpected prevails. And here, we are privy to the unexpected with a twist. When Jesus shares this parable, the turning point isn't on the vineyard's yielding of wild, sour grapes. Instead, what happens at the hands of the tenants who feel entitled and take offense and abuse the vineyard owner's trust by beating and killing their fellow servants, as well as the vineyard's owner, in an effort to lay claim and ownership to what did not belong to them. The fruits of the vineyard were not exclusively theirs. The fruits of God's vineyard are meant to be shared as blessing for all. Violence here is not initiated by an angry and wrathful God. Violence stems from the hard-hearted selfishness, arrogance, and greed of the tenants. Jesus asks, "What do you think? What will the vineyard owner do?" And those listening answer, "He will put those wretches to a miserable, literally wretched death, and lease the vineyard to other tenants who will give him the produce at harvest time." Their answer accords exactly with their imaginations. The authorities challenging Jesus, intent on resisting Jesus and what Jesus has to say, seem unaware of the huge gap between what they do and what they claim to value. They are condemned by the words coming out of their own mouths. In their desire to shut off Jesus, they are shutting off access to God's kingdom. Jesus at no time says that God's desire is to hurt anyone. Jesus urges us to be compassionate as God is compassionate. Compassion calls us to reimagine possessing. As tenants in God's vineyard, our work is to cultivate, protect, tend, and care for God's creation. Jesus warns, the kingdom of God will be taken away and given to those who produce the fruits of the kingdom. God is not violent or vengeful, but injustice contains within it the seed of its own destruction. Live by the sword, die by the sword. So the parable challenges and warns. The stone which the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. This is the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. This is the early Jewish Christian community's understanding of who Jesus is. Jesus is the stone the builders rejected. Jesus is our cornerstone. Jesus proclaims that now is the moment, the kairos of anticipated fulfillment, when God's children are welcome to live fully in the blessings of God's kingdom. We are entrusted with the fruit of God's kingdom, and we are meant to share the harvest of the fruits of God's kingdom. God anticipates a multicolored rainbow world where justice and righteousness reign, where the voice of prophets are heeded as truth, and the call of Jesus, our brother, is for us the axis upon which our world turns, as Jesus beckons us to a great reversal, a change of heart and mind, so that the harvest of God's kingdom may be gathered home.